Somewhere between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, in a wide dark lane of the solar system where the sunlight has already thinned to a paler gold, a small round world is turning. It is grey as wet slate, dusted in places with the faint shine of old salt, and it moves without sound through a region most people imagine as crowded and dangerous, and which is in truth almost entirely empty. There is no roar here, no near collision, no drama of any kind. There is only this sphere, rolling once on its axis every 9 hours, carrying a few bright scars of frozen brine across its face, holding to a path it has kept for billions of years. Picture it turning slowly against the black, half of it caught in pale sunlight, half of it sunk in shadow, the line between day and night creeping unhurried across its dusty plains. You're looking at Ceres, the largest body in the asteroid belt, and the closest thing to a true world that this strange middle country of the solar system has to offer. It glows only faintly, a pale coin of borrowed light, and it has been turning there, just so since long before anyone existed to lift their eyes and give it a name. No one chose it. No one shaped it. It simply gathered itself out of the dust of a young sun, and has been turning ever since, faithful and untroubled through every age of the world. Let your eyes rest on it for a moment, this little globe hanging in the deep. It sits far enough from the sun that our star would look smaller from there, brilliant but reduced, a fierce white point rather than the wide warm disk you know from a summer afternoon. The light that does reach it falls coldly, evenly, and the world receives it without complaint, the way a stone in a riverbed receives the current passing over it. Around it the black is enormous and untroubled, unbroken by any nearer light, stretching away on every side past the reach of any imagining. Nothing rushes out there, nothing hurries, nothing arrives, nothing demands. The little world simply keeps its slow turn, indifferent and serene, lit on one side and dark on the other, trailing its long cool shadow into a space too wide to measure. And into that great stillness you are invited, only to look and to wonder, and to let the looking carry you somewhere lower and softer and farther down than where you began the day. You do not need to remember any of this. That is the first thing to set down, like setting down a heavy bag at the end of a long walk. There will be names tonight, and numbers, and small surprising truths about ice and salt and ancient light, but none of them ask anything of you at all. They are not a lesson to be learned, not a list to be kept, not a test that waits for you in the morning. You're not here to study. You're not here to keep score, or to hold a single fact past the moment it drifts by, or to do anything at all but rest and listen, and let it wash gently over you. Let the facts arrive the way snow arrives on a windless night, each one settling for as long as it likes and then giving way to the next, and what stays with you by morning will be exactly what was meant to stay. The rest can melt. The mind does not need to clutch at wonder in order to be changed by it. It only needs to be near it, the way you are near it now, with your eyes growing heavier and the world growing quiet around you, and your breath already beginning, on its own, to lengthen and slow. There is no effort in this. Listening is enough. Drifting is enough. You may let the words move past you like light over water, catching whatever catches, releasing all the rest. So let the rest of your body follow your gaze out into that calm. There is a world out there worth knowing, and it has waited a very long time, and it is in no hurry at all. It will not mind if you slip away before the end. It kept itself for billions of years before anyone knew it was there, turning unseen and unnamed in the dark, asking nothing, expecting no one. It keeps its own slow time, and it has more of that time than you can imagine, far more than any life could spend, and tonight it offers a little of that deep patience to you, freely, the way the dark offers rest. There is nowhere you need to be. There is nothing you need to do. There is only this small, far world turning, and your breath slowing, and the long night opening out ahead of you both. It came into human knowledge as a child of the calendar's very first day. On the night of the 1st of January, in the year 1801, an Italian monk and astronomer named Giuseppe Piazzi sat at a telescope in Palermo in Sicily, mapping faint stars one by one in the cold. The new century was only hours old, the year just turned. He was a careful and methodical man, working slowly through a long catalogue of stellar positions, recording each faint point by hand, one after another through the dark hours, and among the dim lights he was patiently charting. He noticed one small star that did not belong where it sat, a stranger among the fixed and familiar. He watched for it again the following night, and the night after that, and saw that it had shifted ever so slightly against the steady background of the true stars. Stars do not wander, this one did. And so, on the opening evening of a new century, a man working quietly in the dark became the first human being ever to find one of the countless small worlds that share our sun. There is a particular tenderness in that timing, in a discovery that arrived like a gift left upon the threshold of the year, found by the one watcher still awake to notice it. He gave the moving light a careful watch over the following nights, never quite certain at first what he had caught, wondering if it might be a comet or some uncharted star, and only gradually coming to understand that he had found something new and unaccounted for in the heavens. He did not shout it from the rooftops at once. He measured and waited and watched it move, the way a careful person turns a strange small object over and over in the hand before deciding what it is. He had not been hunting at random. For years before that night, astronomers had suspected that something was missing from the solar system, a world that ought to exist in the wide, unexplained gap between Mars and Jupiter. A simple numerical pattern in the spacing of the known planets, noticed and written down in the previous century, seemed to leave one slot conspicuously empty, one place where a planet should be, and apparently was not. The gap nagged at them. It had the quality of an unfinished sentence, a missing stare. And so a small group of astronomers across Europe had quietly agreed to divide the sky between them and search that region methodically, certain that a hidden world was waiting there to be caught. The pattern was only a rough rule of thumb, and it would later be set aside, but on that first night it had pointed human attention squarely at the right stretch of darkness. That little band of searching astronomers had given themselves a charming name. They called their group the Celestial Police, as though the missing world were a fugitive to be hunted down and brought in, and they had carefully parcelled out the zones of the sky among themselves so that no corner of the suspected region would go unwatched. There is something endearing in the image, a handful of stargazers across Europe solemnly patrolling their assigned beats of the heavens, each watching his own patch of dark for the runaway planet. They were earnest and they were organised, and in the end the quarry simply turned up elsewhere, found by a man outside their ranks, but their patient watching was part of the same great readiness, the sense that humanity had finally turned its full attention toward that gap and was determined not to look away. Piazzi was not even formally among that searching group when he made the find. He stumbled upon the wanderer almost by accident, in the ordinary course of his careful star charting, before the others had even assigned him any region to watch. The organised hunters, who had so deliberately divided the sky and prepared their nets, were quietly beaten to the prize by a man who was simply doing his nightly work and paying attention. There is a tender irony in that the long-sought missing world was caught not by the grand coordinated search, but by one patient observer minding his own careful task, looking elsewhere, attentive enough to notice when a single faint point of light refused to stay where it belonged. The greatest discoveries often arrive in just that way, sideways, unbidden, to someone who was merely paying close and unhurried attention to the thing right in front of them. He could not have known that first night how large his stranger would turn out to be. What he had found was the single biggest object in the entire asteroid belt, a sphere about 940 kilometers across. If you could set it down gently upon the surface of the Earth, it would stretch from one side of a great country to the other, wider than France, wider than the whole state of Texas, a grey mountain of a thing far too vast to take in from any single hilltop. Picture it resting on the ground, its curved horizon climbing up beyond the clouds, its far edge lost entirely below the rim of the world. And yet, set against the sun and the planets, it is small enough to feel tender toward, small enough to hold in the mind like a smooth stone you might cup in your palm. It lives at a gentle in-between scale, too big to be a mere rock and too small to crowd the imagination, and there is something restful in a thing that is grand without ever becoming overwhelming, large enough to be a world and yet near enough to size to love. It is, in truth, a modest world, even among the moons. For all that it is the giant of the asteroids, Ceres is smaller than our own familiar moon, smaller than many of the moons that circle the larger planets. A globe you could lay several times across the face of the Earth and still have room to spare. About 1 part in 13 of the Earth's width, no more. To stand upon it and look around would be to feel the curve of the horizon press a little closer than it does at home, the ground falling away sooner, the whole small world more nearly within reach. There is an intimacy in that smallness, the sense of a place you could almost know all of, a world scaled gently down to something the heart can hold. If you wish to picture the difference in size between the two worlds, you might set the Earth as a basketball and lay Ceres beside it as a small marble. That is roughly the proportion, a great ball and a little one, the wide round Earth and the modest globe of Ceres that would not even fill your cupped hand at such a scale. And yet the marble is a true world in its own right, with mountains and craters and a hidden sea, complete in every way that matters, only smaller. There is something tender in holding the two together in the mind, the familiar Earth and its distant little cousin. The same kind of thing at vastly different scales, both of them round, both of them turning, both of them quietly going about the long business of being a world. Its whole surface, in fact, is no larger than a single great country here on Earth. If you could unroll the entire face of Ceres and lay it flat, all of its plains and craters and its one solitary peak together, the area would come to something near the size of a large nation, a land you could imagine crossing on foot given time and patience enough. Set against the boundless seeming surface of the Earth, with its endless oceans and continents you could never hope to walk in a lifetime, Ceres is almost intimate, a world whose every region could be named and known. It is not a limitless place, but a finite and knowable one, with a surface you could very nearly hold in a single map and trace with one fingertip. And there is a comfort in a world with edges you can reckon, a place small enough to be wandered from end to end in the mind, every grey kilometre of it accounted for and at rest. For all its modest size, it holds a remarkable share of everything in that whole belt of rubble and rock. Astronomers reckon that Ceres alone accounts for something close to 1/3 of all the mass scattered across that enormous ring of debris. Perhaps a little less, but a startling fraction by any honest measure. One world gathering up so much of the region's substance into its single quiet body, while uncountable lesser fragments drift around it like dust around a lamp. Imagine pouring all the broken stone of that vast ring into one pan of a great balance, and setting Ceres alone in the other, and watching the single world hold its own against very nearly everything else combined. To picture the belt truly is to picture not a swarm at all, but a near emptiness with one great pearl resting at its centre, and that pearl is Ceres, holding most of the family's weight within its one round form, the heavy still heart of a thin and scattered ring. The belt itself is nothing like the dense storm of stone the old films pretend it is. Spread your awareness across that vast donut of space between the two planets, and you would find it mostly, overwhelmingly empty. The pieces are so far apart from one another that a traveller passing straight through the middle of it might never see a single one up close, might cross the entire width of it, with nothing but stars in every window. If you could somehow gather every asteroid in the belt into one ball, the total would not even rival our own moon. So Ceres does not push through any crowd. It sails alone through a great deal of nothing, the brightest and roundest island in an ocean of black, and the emptiness around it is not lonely so much as spacious, the kind of vast room in which a tired mind can finally stretch out and breathe. What makes Ceres round at all is the most patient force there is. It is heavy enough that its own gravity has slowly, over the long ages, pulled every part of it inward toward the centre, smoothing away the lumps and corners that smaller asteroids keep forever. The result is a true sphere, or very nearly one, a ball you could imagine cupped between two hands. This is the quiet line that separates a mere rock from a world. Below a certain size, gravity simply gives up and lets a body stay jagged and irregular, a great potato of stone tumbling end over end through the dark. Above that size, gravity wins, and the object is folded gently into a globe. Ceres sits just over that threshold, the smallest member of a select and special club, having earned its roundness the slow way, by sheer accumulated weight pressing inward, over time, toward its own still centre. It is not a perfect sphere, and the reason for that is gentle too. Because Ceres turns, spinning once every 9 hours, the steady push of that rotation has nudged it very slightly outward at its equator, leaving it a touch wider around the middle than from pole to pole. Astronomers call such a shape an oblate spheroid, a sphere ever so faintly flattened, the same soft squash that spinning gives to the Earth and to nearly every turning world. You would never see the difference by eye. It is a matter of a few kilometres across a sphere of hundreds, but it means that even the shape of the little world is a record of its motion, the soft outward lean of something that has been turning without rest since the beginning. And it turns in the ordinary settled way, spinning in the same direction it travels around the sun, the same direction as most of the worlds in the family, an unremarkable and orderly turning, nothing strange about it, simply a small world rolling forward as it goes. That hard-won roundness earns it a special name. Ceres is a dwarf planet, and it is the only one of its kind in the inner solar system, the single small round world keeping company with the 4 rocky planets and the Sun, while its cousins, Pluto and the others, circle far out in the frozen dark beyond Neptune. All the other known dwarf planets dwell in that distant outer cold, immense distances away, but Ceres alone chose the inner reaches, near enough to feel a real measure of the sun's light. Of all the dwarf planets we know, it is the nearest to that fire, the closest and the warmest of the scattered family. There is something companionable in that thought, in knowing that the little globe is not quite so exiled as the rest of its kind, that it keeps a place at the inner table even if it sits very far down at the end of it, the last of the small round worlds before the great long cold begins, a lone outpost of its kind in the warm and rocky country near the sun. It carries an old and gentle name, far older than any telescope that ever found it. Piazzi called his discovery Ceres, after the Roman goddess of the harvest, the deity of grain and ripening fields and the slow turning of the agricultural seasons. She was the keeper of growing things, the one who, in the old stories, made the wheat stand tall and gold across the warm fields of Sicily, who taught people to plough and to sow and to gather the grain in. Her oldest temple was said to lie upon that very island where Piazzi worked, so the name was close at hand, drawn up almost from the soil beneath his own feet. The word itself is soft to say, 3 gentle syllables, a name that sounds a little like something ripening, something warm, and it suited the careful man's instinct that a new world ought to be given a deep and ancient name, not a fashionable one, something rooted in the old stories that would still sound right and true 10,000 years from now. He had wanted at first to attach a second name to it, a flattering nod to a royal patron of the time, but that political half of the name was quietly dropped by other astronomers, and only the goddess remained. It was for the best. Names given to win favour tend to age badly, while names drawn from the old deep wells of myth seem to belong to a thing forever. So the world kept only Ceres, only the harvest, and shed the courtly flattery as a tree sheds a leaf, until what was left was simple and clean and lasting, a single word for a single round world far out in the patient dark. From that one name a small inheritance of words has grown. Most familiar of all is the word cereal, the grain in the morning bowl, which comes directly from the goddess by way of her old dominion over grain and growing. Every box of breakfast grain on every kitchen shelf carries her name without anyone thinking of it. But the borrowing did not stop there. A few short years after the world was found, chemists discovered a new metallic element and chose to name it cerium in honour of the bright new planet so freshly added to the sky, so that the discovery in the heavens and the discovery in the laboratory were tied together by a single shared name. So the goddess of the harvest lent her name in the same brief span to a faint world of salt and ice, and to a silvery metal on the chemist's bench, threading herself quietly through both the heavens and the earth, through the morning bowl and through the periodic table alike. For a little while, this world held a grander title than the one it wears today. In the years right after its discovery, astronomers counted Ceres as a full planet. The missing one they had so long suspected must lie hidden in the wide gap between Mars and Jupiter. For decades it appeared in the textbooks and the star charts of the day, right alongside Earth and Saturn, a planet in its own right, numbered among them, drawn proudly into the family portrait of the Sun and given its place among the great worlds. Children of that era learned its name as one of the planets, as ordinary and settled a fact as any other. It was only later, as more and more small bodies were found sharing that same belt, that its title was quietly revised downward. Ceres itself did not change in the slightest. It did not grow smaller, or dimmer, or wander from its path. Only the words around it shifted, the way a name on a door can change while the room behind it stays exactly the same, full of the same furniture, lit by the same window, entirely untroubled by whatever it is now called. It was not alone in that demotion. In the years after Ceres, astronomers found other bodies sharing the belt, and gave them names of their own, Pallas and Juno and Vesta among them, and for a time these too were counted as small planets. But as the count grew and grew, it became clear that this was a whole new population of objects, a crowded family of lesser worlds, and the title of planet was withdrawn from all of them together. They became asteroids, a new word for a new kind of thing. Ceres rejoined its siblings in that reclassification, the first found and the largest, and waited. Much later, when a gentler middle category was at last created, Ceres alone among them was lifted back up, not quite to planet, but to dwarf planet, the round one, the queen of the belt restored to a quiet dignity all her own. The very word asteroid that they were given is itself a soft and fitting thing. It was coined to mean star-like, because in the telescopes of the day these new bodies showed not as disks but as mere points of light, indistinguishable at a glance from the true stars around them. So the whole family was named for that gentle deception, for the way they masqueraded as stars while quietly wandering against the real ones. Ceres was the first to wear that name, the original star-like body, the one whose discovery taught astronomers that not every point of light in the sky was as fixed and far as it seemed, that some of those small steady sparks were worlds in disguise, close and slow and waiting to be known. Its present rank was, in a sense, created partly for its sake. When astronomers at last drew up the gentle middle category of the dwarf planet, setting it between the great planets and the ordinary small bodies, they did so in the same season that distant Pluto was moved into that same new class. So Ceres and Pluto, the inner world and the outer, were reclassified together, the two of them helping to define what this new kind of world would mean, one at each end of the planetary realm. After 2 centuries of being first a planet and then a mere asteroid, Ceres found itself at last in a category that fit, neither too grand nor too humble, a true round world that simply happens to share its lane. It had finally come home to the right name. Ceres now keeps company with only a handful of others in its present rank. There are just a few recognised dwarf planets in the whole solar system, Pluto among them, and a small scattering out in the cold beyond Neptune. And of that select group, Ceres is by far the smallest, the littlest of the little worlds, and the only one to dwell in the warm inner reaches rather than the distant dark. It is the small one of a small family, the closest and the least, and there is a tenderness in holding the position of the most modest member of an already modest club, the gentle runt of the round worlds, keeping its quiet place nearest the sun. Almost the moment it was found, it was very nearly lost again. Soon after Piazzi tracked his moving star across the winter sky, the little point of light slid too close to the glare of the sun and vanished entirely from view, and for a tense and uncertain year afterward, no one could be sure where it had gone, or whether it would ever be recovered at all. It might have remained only a curious story of a thing glimpsed once and then never again, a wanderer that slipped away before anyone could fix its path. The loss was real, and the worry genuine. To find a new world and then immediately misplace it must have felt like catching something precious and watching it slip straight back into the dark. It was a young mathematician named Carl Friedrich Gauss who rescued it from that disappearance, and he was scarcely more than a boy at the time, in his early 20s, his great fame still ahead of him. Faced with only a handful of scattered observations gathered before the world slipped away, he invented along the way a new and powerful method for reckoning a full orbit from just a few scraps of data, a technique so useful it is still in use today. Working with pencil and paper alone by the light of a lamp, turning the sparse numbers over and over through long evenings, he predicted exactly where the lost wanderer ought to reappear and when, many months later. When telescopes were at last turned to that precise patch of sky, there it was, faithful to the mathematics, sitting almost exactly where the young man's calculations had promised it would be. A world found, lost and found once more, drawn back out of the dark by nothing more than the careful patience of human thought, by numbers worked and reworked beside a lamp. There is something deeply moving in that rescue, in the idea that a world too faint and too far to hold on to by sight could be held instead by mathematics, caught in a net of numbers and reeled gently back. Gauss never went to Ceres. He never set eyes upon it through any great telescope, in all likelihood never saw more than the cold figures of its few recorded positions. And yet, by the sheer attentive force of his reasoning, he reached across that enormous gulf and laid a hand upon the lost thing, told the sky exactly where to look, and was right. A mind alone, with paper and patience, recaptured a whole world. The little globe has been securely known ever since, never lost again, anchored in our maps of the heavens by that single, long act of reckoning carried out by lamplight in the dark. Its precise place in the solar system is a gentle middle distance. Ceres orbits the Sun at a little under 3 times the Earth's distance from it, out where the warmth has noticeably faded, but the deep cold of the outer planets has not yet fully taken hold. Sunlight reaching it is far weaker than the light we know, perhaps a 9th or a 10th as strong, so that even high noon on Ceres would feel like a pale and silvery dusk to an eye raised on Earth. It is a world held at arm's length from the fire, near enough to be lit but far enough to stay always cool, keeping a respectful and unchanging distance from the source of all that light. It never draws closer, and never falls away, only circles at its set remove, year upon year, in the same steady relationship with the sun it has kept since it first took shape. And it is cold there, deeply and reliably cold, with that thin and distant sunlight. Even at the warmest point of its day, in the most directly lit places, the surface of Ceres stays far below the freezing point of water, and in the shadows and toward the poles, the cold sinks to depths that would stop the breath. This is why its water keeps so faithfully to ice, why the brine that rises must give itself up so quickly to the vacuum, why nothing thaws and runs and pools as it might on a warmer world. The whole little globe is held in a steady chill, a temperature that scarcely shifts, a cold so even and so constant that it has become simply the condition of the place, the unremarkable weather of a world at rest. Because it sits so far out, the very sunlight that touches it is older than the light we feel. Light from the sun takes about 8 minutes to reach the Earth, but it must travel on for many minutes more to arrive at Ceres, more than 20 minutes in all from the moment it leaves the sun. So the daylight falling on that dark, dusty ground set out from the sun while a person on Earth would still have had time to walk a slow mile, Even light, the fastest thing there is, must take its unhurried while to cross that distance, and the little world receives each ray a full third of an hour after it was born. There is a strange patience even in its sunshine, light that has been travelling a long quiet time before it ever lands. Far closer to our own age, 2 full centuries after Piazzi first squinted at his moving star, a small spacecraft crossed the void to see Ceres face to face. It was called Dawn, and it travelled the wide gulf between Earth and the Belt, riding upon a thread of pale blue ion thrust, a gentle continuous push so faint you could scarcely feel it resting on your open palm, yet so utterly tireless that it carried the craft across hundreds of millions of kilometres of empty space. There is a kind of poetry in that engine, in the idea of covering an unimaginable distance, not with one great violent burst of fire, but with the very softest possible force, applied without pause, day after day and year upon year, until the impossible journey was simply, quietly done. Reaching Ceres at all was the work of years. The little craft was launched from Earth and then spent the better part of a decade crossing the solar system, looping outward in a long, unhurried spiral, swinging once past Mars to borrow a little of that planet's motion, drifting for years toward the belt, pausing at Vesta along the way, and only then continuing on to Ceres. Nearly 8 years passed between leaving Earth and settling into orbit around the dwarf planet. It was a voyage measured not in days or months, but in seasons and years, a patient outward drift across an almost unthinkable distance, the craft growing ever more distant and the sun ever smaller behind it. To reach so faint and far a world took the steady patience of most of a decade. The little craft was aptly named for what it went to find. It was called Dawn because the worlds it visited are thought to be survivors from the very dawn of the solar system, ancient bodies that formed early and changed little, holding within them the conditions of the beginning. To send a ship called Dawn to study the dawn of everything is a quiet kind of poetry, a name chosen to match its purpose. It went out to read the first chapter of the solar system story, written in the rock and ice of 2 old worlds, and its very name carried that hope, the search for the light at the beginning of things. There is a fittingness in that name beyond the poetry of it, for these primitive bodies really do preserve, better than the great reworked planets, the conditions of that first morning. To study Ceres is to lean a little closer to the moment when everything began to take shape, when the cold dust first gathered into worlds, and to do that aboard a craft called Dawn feels exactly right. That whisper of an engine ran on a strange and beautiful fuel. Dawn carried xenon, an inert and noble gas, the same rare gas that glows in certain bright lamps, and it pushed itself forward by flinging atoms of that gas out behind it at tremendous speed, a thin stream of charged particles glowing a soft blue against the black. The thrust at any single instant was almost nothing, no more than the weight of a single sheet of paper laid across your open hand, a push so faint you could not feel it at all. But in the frictionless silence of space, even the gentlest steady push builds and builds upon itself, gaining speed without limit, until a feather-light nudge held patiently for years becomes a journey clear across the solar system. It is a lovely lesson hidden inside the engineering, that the faintest constancy, never once relenting, can carry you in the end far farther than any sudden burst of force ever could. When Dawn arrived in the spring of 2015 and slipped into orbit, it became the first machine ever to circle 2 separate worlds beyond Earth on a single mission, having already visited and studied the bright asteroid Vesta along the way before journeying onward to Ceres. No spacecraft had ever done such a thing before, lingering at one distant body and then leaving it behind to settle into orbit around another. Every craft before it had been bound to a single destination, falling toward one world and never escaping its pull again. Dawn alone could let go of one world and reach across the empty millions of kilometers to another, and then stay. It was a first made possible entirely by that patient blue engine, which alone could nudge a craft out of one orbit and into the next without exhausting itself. 2 worlds, visited and held and studied by one small faithful traveller on one long unbroken journey through the dark, a single set of eyes that learned two faces. For something over 3 years, that little craft circled and studied Ceres, drawing closer in careful stages, mapping and measuring through a long, patient season of work before its strength finally failed. 3.5 years is a long time to spend in the company of one small, distant world, time enough to learn its every crater and slope, to watch its ice shift and its light change, to come to know it as no one ever had before. The spacecraft gave nearly the last of its working life to Ceres, lingering far longer at the dwarf planet than it had at Vesta, settling in like a long guest who comes to love the house. It is still out there, that little explorer, silent now, its fuel long since spent, drifting endlessly around Ceres in a slow and stable orbit, calculated to hold for many decades to come. It does not speak anymore. It sent its last word home and then fell quiet, and now it simply circles, a small dark machine wheeling above the white faculae and the steep ice dome, no longer listening, no longer answering, only there. When its mission finally ended, those who guided it made a careful and tender choice. Rather than letting it crash down onto the surface, they left it parked in a high orbit, so that it would not contaminate any place where the world's hidden water might, just possibly, harbour the conditions for life. So Dawn keeps its distance out of respect, a faithful companion that ran out of breath but never came down, turning and turning above the salt-streaked plains in the cold, keeping a long and wordless watch over the world it came so very far to know, and leaving it clean and untouched for whoever might come after. What Dawn saw as it spiralled lower and lower over the months was a face of soft greys and shadowed hollows, and then, gleaming out of all that muted stone, something startling, bright spots. Patches so white and so reflective that, glimpsed from a distance as the craft approached, they looked almost like lights left burning on the surface, like windows lit in a darkened house seen across a wide night field. In the very first images taken from far away, before the craft drew close, the brightest spot was so dazzling against the dark that it overwhelmed the camera and showed only as a single blinding point. A tiny star fallen onto the surface with no detail at all. It teased and refused to be read. For a time no one knew what it was, and the not knowing was its own small marvel, a fresh mystery hanging in plain sight on a world we'd only just learned how to truly see. They would turn out to be the most beautiful kind of answer, and the path to that answer begins where the night does, down on the floor of a single great crater. The crater is called a crater, a wide bowl gouged into the northern reaches of Ceres long ago by some ancient impact, roughly 90 kilometres across and several kilometres deep, wide enough that a whole city could be lost upon its floor, deep enough that its rim would tower far overhead from within. To stand at its centre would be to stand in an enormous shallow amphitheatre of grey stone, the walls a faint ring on the far horizon all around, the black sky overhead, and beneath your feet the brightest place on the whole little world. Astronomers gave that dazzling centre a name of its own, Cerealia Facula, a bright torch of pale material so reflective that it nearly seems to glow from within. To the eye it would be the colour of fresh snow set against the dull charcoal of the surrounding plain, a wide spill of white you could imagine catching the weak sunlight and throwing it back like a mirror laid at the bottom of a dark well. Out of all the shadowed, even-toned land of Ceres, this one patch refuses to be grey, and the contrast is so sharp that it can be made out from very far away indeed, the single defiant gleam on an otherwise sleeping face. In the earliest distant views it shone out brighter than anything else on the globe, a white spark on a grey ball, impossible to miss, and impossible for a long while to explain. It was the thing everyone wanted to understand, the bright riddle at the bottom of the bowl. The very word for those bright patches is a tender one. Astronomers call them faculae, a Latin word that means, quite simply, little torches. So the brightest places on Ceres are named as if they were small flames carried across the dark floor of the crater. points of light held up in the gloom. It is a fitting name for them. These gleaming stains that catch and hold the faint sunlight, while everything around them drinks it in and gives nothing back. Little torches, set down upon the grey, marking the places where the world long ago let something rise up into the light. At the very heart of that brightest facula stands a low-domed rise, a gentle swelling of pale material pushed up from below, with cracks running across its surface like the lines on an old palm. The whole bright floor around it is fractured and broken, split into a web of fine cracks much as a bed of mud cracks as it dries beneath the sun, a sign that this material was once wet and soft and only later hardened and shrank into its crazed bright pattern. It is a small mountain of salt in effect, raised where the brine welled up most strongly and dried in place, building itself upward over time, layer upon pale layer. To stand beside it would be to stand beside a low white hill in the middle of an enormous shadowed bowl, the brightest object for hundreds of kilometres in any direction. A pale dome of frozen salt glowing under the small far sun, surrounded by a cracked white floor that remembers being a pool. To picture the whole of a crater from above is to picture a great dark bowl with a glowing heart. The wide grey floor ringed by its worn high walls, and there in the middle the blaze of white, with the fainter freckles of brightness scattered off to one side, the whole arrangement like a single eye opened on the surface of the world, dark all around and bright at the centre. It is the one feature of Ceres that anyone remembers, the face the little world turns toward us, the bright pupil in the grey that drew a spacecraft across the solar system to look more closely. Even the names of those bright patches were drawn from the old festivals of the harvest. The brightest centre, Cerealia, takes its name from the Cerealia, the spring festival the Romans held in honour of the goddess herself, days of games and offerings to bless the growing grain. The fainter eastern patches, the Vinalia, are named for the Vinalia, the old festivals of the wine and the grape. So the two bright places on the crater floor are named not merely for the goddess, but for the very celebrations once held in her honour. Festival light laid down upon a frozen world, as though some distant memory of feasting and thanksgiving had been carried all the way out into the cold and set gleaming on the dark. Scattered to one side of that central glow lie other fainter bright patches, known together as the Vinalia faculae, smaller smudges of the same pale brilliance freckling the eastern floor of the crater. Together with the bright centre, they form a kind of small constellation laid down upon the ground, the brightest gathered in the middle and the dimmer ones spread around it like sparks that drifted a little farther before settling and cooling. Some are broad and clear, some no more than faint pale hazes against the dark floor, a whole gentle gradation of brightness scattered across the bowl. To walk among them would be to cross a floor flecked with frozen light, each pale stain marking a place where something rose up from somewhere below and dried in the airless cold, each at its own remove from the bright heart. They are not random scatterings at all. Each one is a clue, and the clue, when at last it was read, proved to be wonderfully ordinary and wonderfully strange both at once. For all the wild guesses people made while the spots were still a mystery, the truth turned out to be the gentlest possible answer. The bright stuff is salt. When Dawn studied the gleaming faculae closely with its instruments, reading the light they reflected, it found them made largely of sodium carbonate, a kind of mineral salt not so very different in spirit from the things that crust the dry rim of an evaporated lake here on Earth. The whitest place on this entire alien world is, of all the things it might have turned out to be, a salt flat. The same plain chemistry you might scrape from an old seabed or find caked at the edge of a desert salt pan, glowing here on the floor of a crater hundreds of millions of kilometres from any human eye. Think of the white crust at the margin of a drying salt lake, how it catches the sun and dazzles, how it crunches underfoot, how it tastes faintly of the sea that left it. That same homely substance, more or less, is what blazes at the heart of a crater. There is a deep comfort in that familiarity, in reaching all the way out to a dwarf planet at the edge of the inner solar system and finding, waiting at the bottom of its brightest scar, something humble enough that you could almost recognize it by touch, by taste, by the memory of an ordinary shore. Where the surrounding plains reflect less than 1/10 of the light that falls on them, the salt of the faculae throws back several times as much, so bright against so dark that the difference is what first drew every eye. It is the same trick a patch of snow plays in a field of bare winter ground, or a whitewashed wall in a dim courtyard, gathering up what little light there is and giving it all straight back at you. The brightness even shifts a little with the angle of the looking, flaring when the sun is right behind the viewer, and softening when the light comes from the side, the way fresh snow can dazzle or dim depending on how you stand to it. On a world dressed almost entirely in charcoal and ash, these few salt-pale patches are the one place the light is welcomed and returned rather than swallowed whole, and that simple difference, dark drinking and bright giving, is the whole reason the bright spots ever caught our attention across the void. Salt like that does not simply appear unbidden on a dry and frozen surface. It is what gets left behind when salty water rises, lingers for a while, and then departs, leaving its dissolved minerals stranded as a pale crust. So the bright spots are not lamps, and they are not simple ice. They are the dried tide marks of water that came up from somewhere deep inside Ceres, seeped slowly toward the surface as a cold brine, and then, exposed to the hard vacuum and the bitter chill, gave up its liquid to space and left only its salt sitting in the thin sunlight. Every gleaming facula is a small monument to a flow that has been and gone, the fingerprint of an ocean pressing patiently upward from below and signing its name in white upon the dark. There is a particular tenderness in standing, even only in the mind, on that bright cracked floor. It is the place on all of Ceres where the hidden sea came closest to the open sky, where the deep, dark water rose through the rock and reached the very surface and left its mark in plain view. Everywhere else the ocean stays buried, sealed beneath kilometres of crust, but here it touched the light just once and signed its passage in white. To walk there would be to walk on the one spot where the inside of the world had reached out and met the outside, the meeting place of the buried sea and the open dark. In that sense, the scattered bright deposits are a kind of faded map, marking out the places where water last reached the surface. Trace the pale stains across the floor of a crater, and you are tracing the final shoreline of an ancient flow, the high water mark of a brine that pooled here and seeped there and then withdrew forever into the depths. Each white patch says, here the water came, here it lingered, here it left its salt and went. It is the ghost of a coastline drawn on a world that has no seas at all anymore, the memory of water written in the very mineral the water left behind, a tide line frozen in place long after the tide itself has gone. That single bright centre may be the most dazzling spot in the entire asteroid belt. Out of all the millions of bodies wheeling in that vast ring, out of every crater floor and every sunlit slope on every nameless stone, the salt of Cerealia facula stands among the very brightest surfaces to be found anywhere in that whole region of the solar system. The dimmest, darkest belt in the family of the Sun holds, at the bottom of one northern crater on its largest world, this one fiercely reflective jewel. There is a pleasing symmetry in that, the brightest thing for a vast distance around resting in the heart of a world dressed otherwise in ash, a single white gem set in a ring of dark stones. The source that feeds those gleaming deposits seems to lie far down indeed. The brine that rose to paint a crater's floor appears to have climbed from a reservoir many kilometres beneath the surface, a deep cold pocket of salty water held in the lower crust, sending its slow seepage up through cracks toward the light. So the gleaming spots are not shallow puddles, but the surface end of a long quiet plumbing that reaches deep into the world, a faint bright signal from a hidden depth. To stand on the bright floor would be to stand at the very top of a column of brine descending kilometres into the dark, the visible tip of something buried and patient and far below. Some of that salt, when it was first measured, told an even more delicate story. It is a strange and lovely thing that a stain of salt can carry a date, can tell you not only what it is but roughly when it came to be. Among the bright minerals, Dawn found a kind of salt that holds water within its very crystals, a damp salt that cannot survive long in the vacuum of space before it dries out and crumbles into a different, drier form. Such a salt is impatient. Left exposed to the void for very long, it gives up its trapped water and changes. Yet there it was on Ceres, still holding its water, still in its damp form. And the only way that makes sense is if the salt is young, laid down not in the deep past but recently, in the long reckoning of a world, so recently that it has not yet had the time to lose its dampness to the emptiness around it. The bright spots, it seems, are not ancient at all. They are fresh, or very nearly so. The still moist signature of brine that rose into the light a mere blink ago by the slow clock of the cosmos, the wet ink of a world still writing. And there truly may be an ocean down there, or at least the lingering ghost of one. Beneath the crust of Ceres, the evidence gathered by Dawn points to a layer of briny water, or of water mixed with rock and ice into a soft and slushy mantle, a hidden reservoir buried beneath the grey skin of the world. Some who have studied those white patches most closely suspect that a pocket of that brine remains liquid even now, kept from freezing solid far below the surface, a small dark sea holding on in the depths long after the rest of the world turned to stone and ice. The salt strewn across the surface are the visible signature of that buried sea, brine that found cracks and channels in the crust and made the long climb up into the light across the ages. To picture it truly is to picture a world that is not solid stone all the way down, not a dead and frozen ball, but a layered, almost living-seeming thing, rock and ice and dark, cold water, cradling a hidden wetness close to its heart beneath the surface dust, a buried tide that may still, even now, be faintly stirring in the dark. That layering means the little world is, in its own quiet way, organised within. Early in its life, while it still held more warmth, the heavier rock seems to have sunk slowly toward the centre, while the lighter ice and water rose toward the outside, sorting the world into a rocky core wrapped in a softer icy mantle and a dusty crust above that. It did to itself gently and over ages what the great planets did, separating into layers by weight, the dense sinking and the light rising, settling into an orderly arrangement of heavy below and light above. Cut the little world open in the imagination, and you would find it sorted like that, stone at the heart, ice and brine above, dust on the skin, each in its proper place. So Ceres is not a simple heaped-up rubble pile, but a structured world in miniature, a small sphere that took the trouble, long ago, to arrange its insides with care, and then to hold that arrangement ever since. You can read that hidden ice in the simple lightness of the world. Ceres weighs far less for its size than a ball of solid rock would, only a little more than twice the heaviness of plain water for any given volume of it. A lump of ordinary stone of the same bulk would press down a good deal harder. That low weight is the quiet arithmetic that gives away the ice within, the telltale lightness of a world part built of frozen water. Its very lightness is a kind of confession, a single number that whispers of all the ice folded into its body, diluting the rock, lifting the whole globe toward the buoyancy of water frozen hard. You do not even need to land and dig to know it is there. To weigh the little world, even from far across the dark by the way it tugs on a passing spacecraft, is already to know that it cannot be solid stone, that something lighter and colder must be hidden, in great quantity, in its depths. Its near neighbour offered the perfect contrast, and the same small craft saw both. Before it ever reached Ceres, Dawn spent time circling Vesta, and the two worlds could hardly have proved more different. Vesta is dry and stony and scarred, a hard, battered world of bright rock with its water long since gone, pale and parched, while Ceres turned out dark and soft and wet, holding its ice close beneath a dusty skin. They are the two greatest bodies in the belt, near neighbours, born of the same region at the same dawn, and yet one grew up dry and the other damp, one bright and one dark, as different as a sun-baked stone and a covered well. One craft, two neighbours, and between them the whole story of how worlds can diverge from a common beginning, one baking away its water and one keeping it locked safe inside. To have visited both on a single journey was to hold the dry and the wet ends of the belt in one steady set of eyes, and to see how much, from so similar a start, a world can choose to become. How much water, in the end, does it hold? More than you might ever guess for so small a body. From its low density, astronomers reckon that as much as a quarter of Ceres, measured by mass, could be water, locked away for the most part as ice in a thick layer beneath the rocky crust. A full quarter of the little globe, a world that is in large part frozen sea wearing only a thin coat of rock and dust over its ice. If all of that ice could somehow be gathered up and gently thawed, Ceres might hold more fresh water than every river and lake on the entire surface of the Earth. Think of that for a moment, a sphere you could fit many times inside our own planet, and yet holding within it more sweet water than all our streams and ponds and reservoirs combined, every drop of it frozen and patient and waiting in the dark. A single dwarf planet, far out in the cold, cradling ocean's worth of water within its bones, keeping it without a sound through age upon age upon age. A quarter of a world is a hard thing to truly picture. Take away 1 part in 4 of everything Ceres is, and what you remove would be water, frozen water, enough to fill imaginary oceans. Not a thin frost, not a buried trickle, but a great fraction of the entire body, ice woven through it from near the surface down toward the core. The little grey world is, in a real sense, as much a vast frozen reservoir as it is a ball of rock, a sphere of stone and ice in nearly equal measure, dressed on the outside in a thin coat of dark dust that hides the cold abundance within. That this much water survives so close to the sun is itself quietly surprising. The inner solar system is the warm and rocky part of the family, the place where ice tends to be cooked away long ago, leaving behind only stone and metal. Yet here is Ceres, the nearest dwarf planet to the fire, holding a great share of frozen water as if it had wandered in from somewhere colder and never quite warmed through. It is a wet world in a dry neighbourhood, a held breath of ice in a region built of stone, and its very moistness marks it as something a little out of place, a quiet exception keeping its cool reservoir intact, where so many other bodies long ago lost theirs. Here and there that hidden water makes itself faintly known above the surface. When sunlight falls just so into the depths of a cut or crater, a thin haze sometimes seems to gather over the bright spot, a barely there mist hanging in air that is hardly air at all. It would be the faintest of veils, a wisp you could almost see through, brightening for a while in the low sun, and then thinning away to nothing as the light shifted. For Ceres has no true atmosphere, only the most tenuous breath of water vapour, rising where ice meets the slight warmth of the sun and lifting off into the near vacuum before fading once more into the dark. It is the gentlest exhalation imaginable, a world breathing out a little water in the sunlight and drawing the breath back in when the sun moves on, so faint a thing that it took our very finest instruments even to notice it was happening at all. A whole world sighing once, almost too softly to be seen. A first hint of that water in the air came even before the spacecraft arrived. Some years earlier, a great space telescope built to gather the faint heat light of distant things turned briefly towards Ceres and caught the faint signal of water vapour escaping the little world, the first solid sign that it was venting water into space. So before any craft had drawn near enough to map its face, astronomers already had a quiet clue that this was a world of water, exhaling a trace of it across the void to be caught by a watching telescope far away. The hint came first, a whisper of vapour detected from afar, and only later did dawn arrive to find the bright salt in the buried sea that the whisper had foretold. That faint exosphere seems to wax and wane with the sun's own moods. When the sun grows more active and casts more of its energetic particles streaming outward across the solar system, the thin veil of vapour around Ceres appears to thicken in answer, and when the sun settles and grows calm, the veil thins away again. so the little world's faintest breath is tied to the breathing of the star itself, swelling and subsiding in a slow distant rhythm across the great gulf between them, rising when the sun stirs and falling when it rests. There is something intimate in that connection, in a world so far away still feeling the changing temper of its distant sun and answering it, exhaling a little more when the light grows fierce, a little less when it gentles, the two of them breathing faintly together across all that empty space. That breath is fed by ice, and ice, on a world this cold, can be remarkably patient and persistent. In the shadowed floors of certain craters near the poles of Ceres, where direct sunlight never once reaches and the cold is bottomless and unchanging, water ice can lie undisturbed for unimaginable stretches of time, trapped in small pockets of permanent darkness. Picture a crater whose high rim casts a shadow that never lifts, whose floor has not felt a ray of sun in the whole long life of the world, a place of perfect and perpetual night. Into such hollows a little frost can drift and settle, and once arrived it has no reason ever to leave. These are cold traps, sheltered basins where ice that wandered there long ago can simply stay, year upon year upon year, with nothing to melt it and nowhere it needs to go. There is a stillness in that thought deep enough to lie down within, the idea of a place so reliably, faithfully cold that whatever arrives there is allowed, at long last, to remain exactly where it is, untouched, unhurried, entirely at rest. In a few rare places the ice does not hide beneath the surface at all, but lies bare upon it, caught in the open. In the shadowed corner of one small bright crater, Dawn found a patch of water ice exposed directly on the ground, sitting at the surface where some recent disturbance had uncovered it before it could vanish away. It is unusual for ice to show itself so openly on a world this near the sun, where exposed ice tends to slip quietly off into space, and finding it there was a small thrill, a glimpse of the hidden interior laid bare for a while at the surface. A patch of true ice, gleaming faintly in a crater's shadow, the buried sea showing its face for once in the open air that is not air. It would not last forever there, exposed as it was, but for now it lingered, a small bright window straight down into the frozen heart of the world, a place where you could have reached out and touched the very water that the rest of Ceres keeps hidden so deep and so well. Dawn even caught the ice changing slowly before its watching eyes. On the shadowed wall of one crater, the spacecraft saw a patch of bright ice grow noticeably larger across the span of a few months, fresh frost gathering where vapour had drifted in from elsewhere and frozen against the cold rock. It was a rare and quiet thing to witness, a world altering its own face in something close to real time, ice creeping outward across a slope while the craft circled patiently overhead. Most change in the cosmos happens far too slowly for any single watcher to see. Here, for once, was a small visible breath of weather on an alien world, frost spreading gently in the dark. Not all of Ceres lies frozen and forever unchanged. Rising from one of its grey plains stands a strange and solitary peak, a mountain called a Huna Mons, roughly 4 kilometres high and some 20 across at its base, with bright pale streaks running down its steep flanks. To set it against something familiar, it rises roughly 4 kilometres from base to summit, about the height of a great alpine peak, a real and imposing height lifted upon a world so small. What makes it truly remarkable, though, is what astronomers came to believe it must be. Not an ordinary mountain pushed up by shifting rock, but an ice volcano, a cryovolcano, built not from molten stone but from a slushy mix of salty water and ice that welled up from deep below, oozed out onto the cold surface, and then froze in place into a steep-sided dome. A volcano made entirely of cold, raising its hill on a world far from the sun, and the white streaks running down its sides are the very salt it carried up with it, the same bright signature as the spots in the distant crater. It stands almost alone out there, a single steep mountain rising from a nearly level plain with no range of peaks around it for company, which only deepens the strangeness of it. There are no neighbouring summits, No foothills climbing up to meet it, just the one abrupt dome lifting from the flat grey ground as though it had been set down by itself. To stand at its foot would be to crane your neck up a steep, bright-streaked slope, while every other direction lay flat to the close horizon, the one tall thing for as far as the eye could reach. Astronomers sometimes speak of it almost fondly as the Lonely Mountain, this isolated cone of frozen brine keeping its own counsel on an empty plain. It is the tallest thing on a world that is otherwise mostly shallow bowls and level dust, and it stands there in perfect silence, streaked with the pale salt of its own slow making, casting a long sharp shadow across the plain each time the small sun rolls low. A volcano made of ice changes how you see the whole little globe. It hints strongly that Ceres has not always been a dead and static stone. That warmth and slow movement once stirred beneath its crust, pushing soft, icy material up toward the light from somewhere deep within. Astronomers suspect there may once have been many more such mountains scattered across the surface, slowly slumping and spreading and flattening over the long ages until only a Huna Mons remained sharp and tall enough to recognize for what it truly is, the last clear survivor of a whole vanished company of ice hills. Imagine them long ago rising one by one across the dusty lowlands, and then sinking back over the ages like candles softening in their own warmth, until just this one was left standing. A world that was, in its own unhurried way, gently alive at one time, breathing salt and ice up from within, reshaping its own face one slow eruption at a time, in a silence so complete that no ear has ever heard, or ever will hear, a single moment of it. Because such ice mountains slowly slump and vanish over time, the fact that a Huna still stands sharp and tall suggests it is young, and that hints, in turn, at something thrilling. If a fresh cryovolcano rose in the relatively recent past, then the inner warmth that fed it may not be entirely gone even now. Somewhere beneath the crust there may still be a little leftover heat, slowly leaking from the decay of certain elements locked into the rock since the world's beginning, just enough perhaps to keep some deep pocket of brine from freezing fully solid. Ceres may not be finished after all. The little world may yet hold a faint warm pulse far down inside it, deep beneath the frozen surface, the last slow embers of a fire that was lit at the very dawn of everything and has never quite gone out. A small heart still barely warm, billions of years on. That same slow inner stirring may quietly explain something curious about the surface above. For a world so very old, Ceres has surprisingly few of the very largest craters, fewer great basins than you might expect after billions of years of being struck by passing debris. By rights, after so long a bombardment, it ought to be far more deeply scarred than it is, pocked with enormous ancient wounds. One leading explanation is that its icy, partly soft interior has slowly relaxed and resurfaced the ground over time, letting even the deeper scars sag and fill and fade away, the way a footprint pressed into soft snow loses its sharp edges as the long night goes on around it. The biggest wounds heal, smoothed from beneath by the slow creep of the ice, until the world keeps only its gentler marks and erases the rest, presenting a face far softer and younger than its true great age, a worn old surface that has been allowed, again and again, to forget. The faces it does keep are gathered into a single, fitting family of names. Almost every named crater on Ceres is called for a god, or a spirit of agriculture, of growth, of the harvest, drawn from cultures all across the surface of the earth, so that the whole of this distant world becomes a quiet gathering of humanity's many keepers of the fields. Spirits of maize and millet and rice, gods of rain upon the furrow and of the first green shoot, deities the farmers of 100 lands once thanked for a full barn, all of them now written side by side upon the same grey globe. There is a logic of great tenderness in that choice, in taking a frozen sphere named for the Roman goddess of grain, and then writing across all its plains and bowls the names that countless different peoples once gave to the powers they believed made their own crops rise and ripen. Walk across that grey surface in the mind and you would pass from a basin named by one people to a crater named by another, the prayers of farmers half a world apart from one another on Earth, now lying side by side in the same cold dust, neighbours at last. A single small world, far from any field that ever grew, carrying the harvest prayers of all of humanity scattered gently and respectfully across its dusty skin, a quiet meeting place for every god who ever blessed a seed or watched over a ripening field. The largest of those scars carries the name Kerwan, after a spirit of the sprouting maize from the stories of the Hopi people, and it spreads across many hundreds of kilometres of the surface, a broad, shallow basin so wide and so worn down by time that you might wander into it without ever feeling the rim beneath your feet. It is less a sharp wound than a vast and tender dish pressed faintly into the ground, its edges long ago softened by the settling of the world beneath it, its floor smoothed nearly flat by the ages. Standing somewhere within it, the curve of it would be far too great to ever see, the far rim hidden entirely below the close horizon, and you would simply walk on level grey plains under a black and crowded sky, entirely unaware that you were moving across the floor of the single largest mark that Ceres wears, a bowl so wide it has become, to anyone within it, merely the ground. The crater of the white faculae takes its own gentle name from the same old idea of the harvest. Achator was a Roman deity of harrowing, of the breaking up and smoothing of the soil before the seed goes into the ground, the careful preparatory work that readies a field for growing things, the raking and the levelling that comes before the planting. So even the crater that holds the brightest and strangest feature on the entire world is named for the patient labour of preparing the earth, as though the whole little globe were being dressed, name by careful name, for some future planting it has not yet known and may never know, a world of salt and frozen water, called everywhere by the soft old names of tilling and growing and grain, as if in patient and unspoken hope, as if someone meant one day to sow it. Some of the youngest craters wear a startling colour you would never expect. When a fresh impact tears open the surface and flings out new material, the freshly exposed stuff on Ceres can carry a faint bluish tinge, a cool tone scattered around the rims and rays of the most recent craters. It is a strange reversal of what we know from many other worlds, where surfaces tend to redden as they age and weather. Here it is the other way around, the young scars are the blue ones, the recently broken ground fading back toward the common grey, only with the long passage of time. So the freshest wounds on Ceres glow faintly blue in the carefully built images, like bruises of the gentlest kind, marking where the world was most recently disturbed, the cool colour of newness slowly warming away into age. One crater in particular shows this freshness almost defiantly. A bright young crater named Haulani carries sharp rays of pale material flung outward across the surrounding plain, long pale streaks radiating from the point of impact like the spokes of a wheel, and a cool bluish cast to the freshly turned ground, all the signs of a strike recent enough that time has not yet softened its edges or dulled its colour. It looks crisp where so much of Ceres looks worn smooth, its rays still clean, its slopes still steep and unblunted, a reminder that even on so ancient a world, new marks are still being made now and then, and that the surface is not a finished and settled thing, but one still occasionally being rewritten, here and there, by the rare arrival out of the dark. The colours of the world overall, though, are few and muted. Across most of its surface, Ceres is an even charcoal grey, a dark and dusty land that reflects only a small fraction of the light that falls upon it, perhaps less than 1 part in 10 of all the sunlight it receives. It is among the darker worlds of the inner solar system, a sphere that drinks in most of the weak light reaching it and gives very little back, so that even close up it would keep a kind of permanent twilight tone, the colour of cooled ash, the colour of a hearth long after the fire has burned down, the colour of wet slate beneath a heavy overcast sky. 9 parts in 10 of the faint sun that touches it are simply swallowed, absorbed into the dark dust and never returned, and it is against that deep dimness that the bright salt spots blaze all the more vividly, the one sharp light on a world otherwise dressed from pole to pole entirely in shadow, a single white flame on a globe of ash. Ceres belongs, by its very nature, to the oldest and most primitive class of bodies in the solar system. It is what astronomers call a carbonaceous world, dark and rich in carbon, made of the kind of unprocessed material that has changed little since the very birth of the planets. Such bodies are like time capsules sealed at the beginning, holding within them a sample of the original stuff from which everything was built, the raw dark substance of the early solar system preserved almost untouched. Where the great planets were melted and stirred and remade by their own inner fires, Ceres kept much of its first nature, never fully cooked, never wholly transformed. To look at it, then, is in a way to look back across more than 4 billion years at the sort of primitive ingredient that elsewhere was reworked into the rocky worlds, but here was left, more or less, exactly as it first came together out of the dark. The dust that darkens it tells a slow story of its own. The surface of Ceres turns out to be rich in clays, in the kind of fine, soft minerals that, here on Earth, generally only form where rock has been in close contact with liquid water for a very long time. Clay is, in a sense, what stone becomes when water works at it patiently enough, and so to find clay spread across Ceres is to find the signature of water written into the very ground. Their presence is one more sign that water once moved through the body of this world, breaking solid rock down grain by grain into soft clay over enormous and unhurried stretches of time. The grey is not lifeless dust at all then, but altered stone, mud mineral and salt, the residue of a long, slow chemistry between water and rock that played itself out in the dark across spans of time no human mind can truly hold, or feel the edges of, or count. Some of those minerals quietly suggest that Ceres may not have been born exactly where it now drifts. The clays on its surface include ammoniated kinds, mineral forms that require ammonia in order to make, and ammonia tends to freeze and survive only much farther out from the sun, in the colder reaches beyond the asteroid belt. Its presence on Ceres is a little like finding a deep water shell high on a mountainside, a clue that speaks of an origin somewhere other than here. So it may be that Ceres, or at least a great deal of the material that built it, first gathered far out in the deep cold and only later settled inward into its present orbit between Mars and Jupiter, a slow migrant carrying the chemistry of a distant, frostier birthplace along with it toward the warmth. A wanderer that came from somewhere colder and farther away, drifting inward across vast spans of time, and found, at the very last, a stiller and slightly warmer place to rest, keeping the memory of its first cold home written into its very minerals. There is gentler chemistry there too, the kind that makes a world feel less like a stone and more like a held breath of possibility. Near a crater named Ernutet, called for an Egyptian goddess of the harvest and of nourishment, Dawn detected patches of organic material, carbon-rich molecules of the sort that form the long, quiet roots of the chemistry of life as we understand it. These are the same kinds of carbon-built molecules that, on the early Earth, eventually wove themselves into living things, the patient first letters of life's long alphabet. They are not life themselves, and nothing on Ceres suggests that any living thing has ever stirred upon it. But organic molecules sitting on a world that also hides briny water beneath its crust are the raw and patient ingredients from which living things are built, gathered here in the cold and simply waiting, as if the world had quietly set out all the materials upon a table, water and salt and the stuff of life, and then paused, indefinitely, before anything could be made of them. The very crust that holds all of this together turned out to be stronger and stranger than anyone expected. Pure ice, over the long ages, would slowly flow and slump and let the great craters sag away entirely, far more than Ceres actually shows. So its outer shell cannot be simple ice. It seems instead to be a sturdy mixture, ice bound together with rock and salt and frozen gas into a tough composite skin, strong enough to hold its mountains and its crater walls upright across the aeons. The world wears, in effect, a crust of frozen mud and salt and ice all knit together, a shell far more durable than frozen water alone, and that quiet strength is what lets its old scarred face endure. Put those several pieces together, and Ceres begins to look like a smaller, nearer cousin of the great ocean moons of the outer planets, of icy Europa and misted Enceladus, those distant moons that hide their seas beneath shells of ice and draw so much of our wondering attention. Water beneath the surface, salts and clays and organic molecules above it, a hidden warmth somewhere in its long history, all the slow ingredients that somewhere, in some patient combination across time, might once have offered a sheltered place for the chemistry of life to begin to stir. And yet Ceres lies far closer to us than any of those famous moons, near enough to reach with far less effort, a small ocean world waiting just across the belt rather than out past the giant planets. No careful person is claiming that life ever arose there, only that this grey globe holds, in miniature and surprisingly close at hand, something of the same gentle promise that draws our eyes and our spacecraft to the icy moons far out in the dark. A promise written in salt and water and the deep patience of time, and written here within easy reach. Ceres itself is very nearly as old as the solar system around it. It gathered together in the first few million years after the sun ignited, very early in the great slow assembling of the planets, which makes it some 4.5 billion years old, an age the mind simply cannot fold itself around. 4.5 billion years is a stretch of time so long that all of human history, every empire and every life, is less than the faintest flicker at the very end of it. Almost everything Ceres is, it has been since the beginning. While planets formed and reformed, and the Earth's own face was made and remade many times over, Ceres mostly settled early into the shape it still keeps, an old survivor from the dawn of everything, holding its ancient form steadily through the entire long history of the sun. To look at it is to look at something nearly first, nearly original, a piece of the early world preserved almost whole. The water it holds may be very old indeed, older perhaps than the seas of the earth. The ice locked deep inside Ceres may have gathered there in the earliest days of the solar system and lain in place, scarcely touched, ever since, a frozen reservoir held perfectly still from very nearly the beginning of everything we know. The oceans of the earth have been churned and evaporated and rained back down countless times over, endlessly remade, but the ice of Ceres may be nearly first water, original and undisturbed, never once turned over since it froze. To rest your mind on that for a moment is to rest it upon water that has waited longer than any ocean you have ever seen, water that was already ancient and unmoving when the first rain fell upon a young and steaming earth, holding its perfect stillness through every age that has come and gone since, without a single ripple, without a sound, simply keeping and keeping and keeping. For all the wonders it hides, Ceres asks a great deal of patience from anyone who would find it for themselves in the night sky. From the surface of the earth it appears as a faint and tiny point of light, never quite bright enough to catch the unaided eye except under the very darkest of skies, and even then only as the dimmest of sparks, easily missed and easily mistaken for any other faint star. There is no disk to see, no colour, nothing to mark it out from the thousands of ordinary stars around it. Generation after generation of sky watchers looked straight at that patch of sky and saw only stars, never guessing one of those faint points was a whole round world with a sea inside it. The eye alone cannot tell the difference, and for the longest time neither could anyone, not until patient watching and patient reckoning teased the truth out of that one wandering point of light. For most who go looking, a telescope, or at least a good pair of binoculars, is needed, and even then it will show itself as nothing more than a small star-like dot, wandering very slowly among the true and fixed stars from one night to the next. Through the eyepiece it looks like any other faint star with nothing to mark it out, no hint at all of the sea it carries or the bright salt it hides, just a modest pale point among countless others. It does not announce itself or call attention. It waits to be sought out, and rewards the seeking only with a modest gleam, a patience asked for and a patience gently repaid to whoever takes the trouble to look. The way to know it at all from Earth is to watch for its slow wandering. Night after night, the faint dot that is Ceres creeps very gradually against the unchanging pattern of the true stars, exactly the same slow drift that first betrayed it to Piazzi long ago. The stars hold their places, fixed and faithful, the same patterns your distant ancestors saw, while this one point slides among them over the course of weeks, tracing a slow path along the band of the zodiac where the sun and planets all travel. To catch it, you must look on more than one night and notice what has shifted. A single light that has stepped a little to one side while all the rest stood still. It hides in plain sight, indistinguishable from a star until you give it time to reveal itself by its motion, rewarding only the patient watcher who returns and looks again and remembers where it was. Roughly every 15 months or so, the Earth and Ceres line up just right, and the little world swings to its brightest and best for viewing. At those times it rises as the sun sets and stays up the whole night through, glowing as strongly as it ever does in our sky, which is still only faintly. Even at its very brightest, it hovers just at the edge of what an unaided eye can catch, a hair too dim for most, so that it sits forever on the threshold between seen and unseen, the brightest of the asteroids and still almost a secret. These reunions come around with a slow regularity, a quiet appointment kept between the two worlds every year and a quarter or so, the moment when Ceres turns its fully lit face toward us and shows itself for a while, at its modest best before drifting on once more into the glare and the distance. Turn the view around, and the Earth would be the wandering evening star of the Syrian sky. From the surface of Ceres, our own world would never stray far from the sun, hanging always near the horizon in the glow of dawn or dusk, a pale blue spark that brightens and fades but never climbs high into the dark. It would be, to any watcher there, a morning and evening star much as Venus is to us, a faint blue herald of the rising and setting of their small bright sun. The very planet from which you watch the heavens would become, seen from out there, just another shy and lovely light low in someone else's sky, keeping close to the sun, never quite stepping out into the full night. Before any spacecraft ever reached it, even our greatest telescopes could make of Ceres only a tiny blurred disk, a small smudge of light with the faintest hints of shading upon it. Some years ago, near the start of this century, a great telescope set high above the air managed the first crude maps of its surface, catching faint suggestions of light and dark patches spread across the little globe, the barest ghost of features that no one could yet truly make out or name. They were tantalizing and indistinct, light and dark smudges that hinted at a real and varied face without ever revealing it. For most of the 2 long centuries since its discovery, Ceres remained a fuzzy point of light and almost nothing more, a world known with certainty to exist and to move and to hold so much of the belt's mass, yet showing humanity not a single one of its true features, until at last a small craft drew near enough to look it full in the face and see. The way that craft read the world was not by touch, but by light. Dawn carried instruments that could spread the sunlight bouncing off the surface into its colours, the way a prism spreads white light into a rainbow, and in the fine pattern of those colours it could read what the ground was made of without ever landing. Each mineral leaves its own faint signature written in the light it reflects, a fingerprint in colour, and by gathering that scattered light the craft could tell salt from clay from rock across the whole little globe. It tasted the world in a sense with light alone, learning the chemistry of planes it never touched, reading the surface the way you might read a face across a room, by the light it gives back. When that craft did draw near, and the blur at last resolved itself into a true face, the surface revealed a quiet drama of slopes and slumps and slow collapse. On the steep inner walls of many of its craters, Dawn saw the unmistakable marks of landslides, places where the loose grey material had let go and slid downhill, gathering into soft fans and aprons at the bottom of each slope. On a world with such feeble gravity and a partly icy crust, such slides move slowly and settle gently, reshaping the steep places grain by grain rather than all at once. Even here, in the deep cold and the total silence, the land is not perfectly still, but quietly rearranging itself over time, sliding by slow and unhurried degrees toward its own settled repose. The ground itself, underfoot, would be soft and deep and yielding. Across billions of years, the steady rain of tiny impacts has ground the surface of Ceres into a thick blanket of fine, loose dust and rubble, a powdery skin lying over the firmer crust below. A boot pressed into it would sink a little and leave a clear print, and in that airless calm, with no wind to ever sweep it away and no rain to wash it, the print would simply stay, sharp and undisturbed, for an unimaginably long time. To walk there would be to write your passage into a surface that forgets nothing, each footfall preserved in the grey powder as if the world meant to keep it, a single quiet line of steps holding its shape long after the walker had gone. In that feeble gravity, even the falling of the dust is a leisurely affair. When a slide lets go, or an impact throws up a spray of fine material, the grains do not drop and settle in an instant as they would on Earth. They rise and hang and float back down with the unhurried grace of motes in a sunbeam, taking their long, gentle time to reach the ground again, sinking like flakes through still water. There is no air to swirl them, no wind to scatter them, only the faint, patient pull of the world coaxing them down at last. Everything that moves on Ceres moves softly, lowered rather than dropped, eased rather than flung, the whole pace of the place hushed by how lightly the world holds on. Even its dust falls like something half asleep, in no hurry to land. Time treats the white deposits gently too, though it does not leave them wholly untouched. The salts of the faculae, fresh and dazzling white when they first dried upon the surface, slowly dim across the ages as the steady faint drizzle of space radiation works upon them, darkening even the brightest stains by slow degrees over enormous spans of time. Out in the open, with no air to shield it, the surface is bathed in a constant thin rain of particles from the sun and beyond, and that rain slowly dulls and darkens whatever it falls upon. So the gleaming spots in Orcata, still so bright, may in fact be relatively young, recent arrivals in the very long life of the world, the marks of brine that rose up not so terribly long ago. The brightest places on Ceres are, in a sense, also among the freshest, the least weathered, and somewhere beneath that bright cracked floor the deep source that fed them may still, even now, in this very moment, be at work, readying the next slow gleam. The gravity that long ago smoothed Ceres into a sphere is also wonderfully, almost playfully weak at its surface. Standing there, you would weigh only a tiny fraction of what you weigh on Earth, scarcely a 30th of your familiar weight, the merest suggestion of a pull rather than the firm and constant grip you've known your whole life. A person who weighs as much as a grown adult on Earth would weigh there only about as much as a small bag of apples, light enough that another could lift them with a single hand. Heavy things become light, and light things become nearly weightless. One easy push of the legs would float you upward, and you would hang there for long moments before beginning to settle again, drifting back down toward the grey ground with all the leisure of a feather let go in still air. To move about on Ceres would be to move through a world that barely holds you down at all, where every step becomes a slow, soft float, where even falling itself is unhurried and gentle and kind. That same gentle hold means it would take remarkably little to leave Ceres altogether. The speed needed to escape its gravity entirely is only a small fraction of what it would take to leave the Earth, more than 20 times easier than breaking free of our own heavy world. So slight a pull, that a powerful enough machine could carry a traveller right off the surface and out into open space with surprising ease. Throw a stone hard enough on Ceres and it might fly far higher and farther than on any world you know. It is a world you could very nearly step away from. A world that holds its visitors loosely in the open palm of its hand, the way an easy host stands near the open door and asks no one at all to stay. There is a strange freedom in that lightness, a sense of a world far too gentle ever to imprison anything, perfectly content to let whatever touches it come and rest a while and then go. A single day on Ceres passes far more quickly than a day on Earth. The whole world turns once on its axis in only about 9 hours, so that its small sun rises and sets in a brisk and gentle rhythm, dawn following dusk and dusk following dawn far faster than your body has ever been used to. 3 of its days and nights would pass within a single one of yours. The little sun would swing up over the grey horizon, cross the black star-thick sky, and sink again while you would scarcely have finished what counts at home as one long afternoon, and then it would do the same again and again, 3 sunrises in the span you call a day. To live there would be to fall asleep and to wake to a fresh morning far more often than you do now, the world tucking itself into darkness and lifting itself again into light in a brisk, soft cadence all its own, never lingering long in either. Imagine a sunrise every few hours, the small bright sun climbing the black sky and then sliding down again, light and dark trading places over and over while you slept, so that you might close your eyes in one short day and open them in another. The rhythm of it would be its own kind of lullaby, the patient turning of a world that keeps a faster, gentler time than your own. Its year, by contrast, is long and unhurried. Ceres takes roughly 4.5 Earth years to complete one full circuit around the Sun, a slow looping journey through the belt that carries it once around in about the time it takes a young child on Earth to learn to walk and run and form its first real sentences. A baby born when Ceres began a single lap would be a small talking child, walking and chattering by the time that one loop finally closed. Whole chapters of a human life would turn while the little world made just one circuit of its star. Long seasons, if a world so evenly lit could be said to have seasons at all, unfolding at a pace that makes our own swift year feel suddenly hurried by comparison. The little world is in no rush whatsoever to complete its great loop, content to take the better part of half a decade over every single turn around its small and distant star, swinging wide and slow through the dark while whole years of earthly life go by. And it keeps to that long orbit on a remarkably even keel. The axis of Ceres is tilted only very slightly from upright, so that it does not lean dramatically toward or away from the Sun, across its year the way the Earth does. Our own world tips well over, and that tilt is the whole reason we have summer and winter, the long lean toward the Sun and away from it. Ceres barely leans at all. As a result, it has almost no seasons to speak of, no deep, dark winters and no high, bright summers, only a long, even mildness held steady year upon year. There is a particular calm in that constancy, in the idea of a world that does not swing between extremes of heat and cold, but simply holds its slight tilt and lets the same pale light fall upon it always, neither warming much nor cooling much, perfectly balanced and unchanging out there in the dark. Because that tilt stays so very slight, the poles of Ceres live in a perpetual dim half-light. At the top and bottom of the world the sun never climbs high, but only skims along close to the horizon, circling low so that those polar lands know neither full day nor true dark, but a long unchanging twilight, a soft grey gloaming held steady through the ages. The light there lies flat and long, throwing every low ridge into a stretched shadow, gilding the rims of craters while their floors stay black forever. To stand at the pole of Ceres would be to stand in an endless dusk, the small sun rolling slow around the edge of the sky, never rising, never setting, only circling at the rim of the world in a twilight that never breaks. That steadiness reaches deeper than a single year. Because its tilt stays so nearly upright over enormous spans of time, the the climate of Ceres holds remarkably constant across the ages, never lurching into the long swings that other worlds endure. The same craters stay always in shadow, the same slopes always in light, the cold traps near the poles kept reliably frozen for billions of years on end. It is a world of deep climatic patience, where almost nothing about the pattern of light and dark has needed to change since the beginning, and where the ice, once settled into its shadows, has been allowed to keep its place undisturbed through nearly the whole life of the solar system. The sky above that even-tempered world would be a strange and gentle thing to stand beneath. Looking up from the surface of Ceres, you would find the sun shrunk to a small, fierce point of light, far brighter than any other star in the heavens, yet far smaller than the warm, wide disk you know from home, casting a thinner and paler light across the charcoal plains. The blackness around it would be absolute and crowded thick with stars, undimmed by any layer of air, sharper and clearer than any night sky you've seen on Earth. And in another quarter of that sky a brighter point might hang, steadier and more golden than the rest, and that would be Jupiter, the great planet lying just beyond the belt. From Ceres, Jupiter would shine as a bright, unblinking beacon, the nearest of the giant worlds, far closer than it ever comes to us, a warm lamp of a star ruling one corner of the black. The little world drifts in the long shadow of that giant's influence, and from anywhere on its dusty surface the giant itself would be one of the brightest things in the heavens, a steady golden eye watching over the belt from just outside its edge. And somewhere among all those stars a single pale blue spark would hang, no brighter than a faint star itself, and that unremarkable spark would be the Earth, with everyone you have ever known living their whole lives upon it. To see your entire world reduced to one dim point of light among thousands is to feel something loosen quietly in the chest. Every ocean you have crossed or dreamed of crossing, every city and every mountain, every person you've ever loved or missed or hoped to meet, all of it gathered into that single faint blue mote, no larger than the dimmest star. It is not a frightening smallness, but a gentle one, the kind that comes from understanding, even for a single moment, how delicately the familiar is held in the dark, how the whole stage of every human life could be hidden behind the tip of one finger held up against the night. Those who picture such a view often speak of a strange tenderness that comes with it, a softening, a sense that if the entire world can be that small and still go on turning safely, then perhaps so can you. And so can this long day now finally gratefully ending. For all its faintness in our sky, Ceres has a near neighbour out in the belt that shines more brightly than it does. The asteroid Vesta, smaller overall than Ceres but wrapped in a far brighter, more reflective surface, can sometimes be glimpsed with the unaided eye on a dark night, in places and at times when Ceres itself cannot be seen at all, so that the larger of the two worlds hides while the lesser one shows itself plainly. Vesta wears a pale, stony skin that throws back much of the light it catches, while Ceres drinks its light into dark dust, and so the smaller body wins the contest of brightness, despite losing the contest of size. It is a lesson in how size and brilliance need not travel together, how the very greatest body in the whole belt can be the more modest one in our sky, keeping its true scale to itself and letting a smaller, paler cousin take the visible place. Ceres does not seem to mind the arrangement at all. It simply holds its great mass and its deep mysteries down in the dark and lets Vesta have the gleam. Out in that same belt drift more small worlds than any one person could ever hope to name in a single lifetime. More than 1 million asteroids large enough to be tracked wheel around the sun in that wide region, along with countless smaller fragments far beyond any counting, and yet spread so thin through such an immense volume of space they almost never meet one another. If you were set down upon a random asteroid in the belt and told to look for its nearest neighbour, you would most likely see nothing at all but stars, the next stone so far off as to be invisible, hundreds of thousands of kilometres away across the empty dark. The belt is far less a swarm than a scattering, a vast and unhurried congregation of stones, each one keeping faithfully to its own lane, drifting through the void with great gulfs of pure emptiness between anyone and the next. Ceres is simply the grandest member of that scattered multitude, the unhurried queen of a kingdom whose subjects are mostly silence and open space, and distance past imagining. The whole of that great belt gathered together would weigh surprisingly little. If you could somehow scoop up every last one of those millions upon millions of asteroids and press them all into a single body, the total mass would still be only a small fraction of our own moon, a fairly modest amount of rock spread impossibly thin across an enormous ring of space. And of that whole modest sum, Ceres by itself claims something close to a third, one single world carrying so great a portion of all that scattered rock that everything else in the belt combined cannot outweigh it more than a few times over. A single sphere standing in, almost, for an entire belt's worth of stone, cradling the better part of all that mass quietly within its one round and patient form. That whole great ring has a plain and fitting name of its own. Astronomers call it the main belt, the chief gathering of asteroids, to set it apart from the other smaller scatterings of small bodies that drift elsewhere in the solar system. It is the main one, the great central reservoir of rubble between Mars and Jupiter, the place where most of the Sun's countless small worlds are kept. And Ceres rules it, the largest body in the main belt, the first found, and the only round one among all those millions, the single dwarf planet riding at the heart of the chief belt of stones. The grand simple name suits it, a plain word for the great plain ring, with Ceres as its quiet sovereign. The belt keeps its own order, shaped by the great planet beyond it. Jupiter's vast gravity, reaching across the gulf, has swept certain lanes within the belt nearly clear, leaving narrow gaps where almost nothing orbits, bands of emptiness combed into the ring by the giant's distant and patient pull. Over the long ages, any stone that wandered into one of those unlucky lanes was slowly nudged out of it, until the lanes stood empty and the rest of the belt drew into the spaces between. The asteroids that remain are gathered into those favoured zones, marshalled into their orbits by forces they will never feel as anything but the simple shape of where they are allowed to be. Ceres rides within that quietly ordered arrangement, neither crowded nor flung out, holding a stable path that Jupiter long ago permitted it to keep, undisturbed in its own broad lane through the dark, settled exactly where the great slow forces left it. Among all those numberless drifting fragments Ceres has chosen, if a world can be said to choose to keep no companion of its own, it has no moon, no small attendant stone circling it the way our familiar moon circles the Earth, only the open black on every side and the distant fixed points of the true stars beyond. Many worlds, even small ones, gather a little moon or two to wheel about them, but Ceres travels with none, its skies forever free of any nearer light than the stars. It moves through its long 4.5-year orbit entirely alone, unaccompanied, a solitary sphere with nothing near it but the wide and gentle emptiness of the belt. There is a kind of quiet self-possession in that solitude, the sense of a world entirely content with its own company, needing no satellite or follower to feel complete, whole and sufficient unto itself in the deep silence that wraps it round on every side. Yet for all its roundness and its grandeur and its hidden sea, Ceres did not quite earn the very highest title, and the reason is a single quiet rule of definition. To be counted a full planet in the modern reckoning, a world must have swept its own orbit largely clear of other bodies, gathered up or flung away most of the smaller things that once shared its path around the Sun. The great planets did exactly this long ago, clearing their lanes until each travelled in lordly solitude, and Ceres has plainly not done so. It still shares its lane with all those millions of belt fragments, drifting along peaceably among them, rather than ruling decisively over them. So it remains classed as a dwarf planet rather than a full planet, not for any lack of beauty or of size or of deep interest, but only because it keeps company instead of clearing the room of its neighbours. There is no shame at all in that distinction, only a gentle truth about a world that prefers, it seems, to share its space rather than rule it alone. It has no magnetism to speak of, and no shifting plates beneath its crust. Unlike the Earth, with its molten, churning core spinning out a great magnetic field, Ceres carries no detectable field of its own, and its crust is a single unbroken shell rather than a patchwork of drifting plates grinding against one another. There are no earthquakes there in the way we know them, no continents colliding, no mountain ranges thrown up by the slow war of the plates. It is in these ways a calmer and more settled world than ours, without the deep violence of land in motion, without the invisible field that wraps the earth round. It simply holds its shape and turns, still within and still without, a small globe untroubled by the restless engines that drive our own larger and louder world. The old myth standing behind its name turns, very fittingly, upon a story of seasons and of loss and return. The Roman goddess Ceres, in the ancient tale, was the grieving mother of Proserpina, a daughter who was carried away into the underworld for a part of each passing year, and in the depth of her grief, the goddess let all the fields of the world go barren and bare until her daughter was returned to her once more. When the daughter came back up into the light, the goddess rejoiced, and the warmth returned, and the green shoots rose again from the thawing ground. The long cycle of her sorrow and then her joy was said by the old storytellers to be the very turning of the seasons themselves, the long cold sleep of the winter world and the green waking of the spring. To name a frozen and sleeping world for her is, in a sense, to name it for the very idea of rest followed faithfully by renewal, for the truth that the dark and barren half of the year always, in its own time, gives way once more to growth and to light. Even a frozen world carries in its name the promise of a spring. In English, the word for anything belonging to Ceres is a soft and pleasing one. To call a thing of Ceres is to call it Syrian, a gentle adjective that turns the goddess's name toward her distant world, so that one might speak of the Syrian plains, the Syrian sky, the long Syrian day. The very grammar of it carries the harvest forward, the goddess's name bending to describe the salt and ice of a body she never knew. It is a small thing, a single soft word, but it ties the language of growing fields to the language of the heavens once again, as so much about this world quietly does. That single ancient name has quietly sown more than just two words across our world. Beyond cereal and cerium, the goddess threads through a whole family of ideas tied to growth and creation and increase, to things brought forth and made to multiply and ripen. A goddess of the harvest, lending her one name across the long centuries to grain, and to a metal, and to this faint bright dwarf world all alike, so that a quiet breakfast on a kitchen table, and a silver element in a laboratory, and a distant sphere of salt and ice all carry within them, entirely unknowing, the very same old root of ripening. Language, much like water upon Ceres, leaves its quiet residue everywhere it has once flowed, in places you would never think to look. The world even carries a small written sign of its own, a symbol from the old days when it was counted a planet. Astronomers gave Ceres a mark to stand for it in their charts, a simple curving emblem in the shape of a sickle, the curved blade once used to cut and gather the ripened grain by hand. Each of the old planets had such a glyph, a single shorthand stroke that astronomers could set down quickly in a crowded notebook, and Ceres earned one too. So the very mark for the world is a harvest tool, a reaper's blade drawn in a single curved line, the ancient instrument of gathering set down as a sign for a world named after the goddess of the gathered field. Even in shorthand, even reduced to one bent stroke upon a page, Ceres keeps its harvest, the curved blade standing quietly in for the whole bright distant sphere. Picture once more the precise moment of the world's discovery, the timing of it, a stranger found among the stars on the very first night of a brand new century. There is a rightness to be felt in finding a world named for harvest and renewal upon the very threshold of a new year, as though the cosmos itself had left a small bright gift waiting on the doorstep of the calendar, wrapped in winter dark, set out to be noticed by the one patient watcher still awake at his telescope in the Sicilian cold, while the rest of the world slept off the turning of the year. It is the kind of coincidence that means nothing and yet feels like something. A new world for a new century, found on the first cold night of it, as though the heavens had timed the gift on purpose. The mind reaches for patterns like that, for small rhymes between the great indifferent cosmos and our own small calendars, and finds a quiet pleasure in them even knowing they are only chance. Every 1st of January and all the years since, the little world has gone on turning in its orbit, marking out its own slow year, wholly indifferent to ours and yet bound to it forever by the simple date of its first finding. In all the time since that finding, only one visitor has ever gone to it. Dawn is the single spacecraft humanity has ever sent to Ceres, the only set of eyes we have ever brought close enough to see it clearly, and since that one mission ended, no other has yet followed. So nearly everything we know of the little world's true face comes from that one patient traveller and the few short years it spent circling overhead. There is a preciousness in that, in the thought that a single visit by a single small craft lifted the whole world out of blur and into clarity, and that for now it waits again, fully mapped but unvisited, for whatever curious machine might one day make the long journey out to renew the acquaintance. In its time there, that one visitor looked very closely indeed. Toward the end of its mission, Dawn dropped into an orbit that carried it astonishingly low over the surface, closer to the ground of Ceres than the great space stations fly above the Earth, skimming only some tens of kilometers above the dark plains and the bright crater floors. From that low vantage it gathered tens of thousands of images, mapping nearly the whole little world in fine detail, picking out boulders and slopes and the texture of the salt. The feeble gravity made such a low and gentle orbit possible, letting the craft hang close above the surface without being pulled down, drifting just overhead like a slow bird over a field, taking in the quiet land below picture by patient picture. It is worth pausing on how recent all of this knowing truly is. For more than 200 years, across the whole span from its finding to the day Dawn arrived, Ceres was little more than a name and a moving dot, a fact in a table, a faint smudge in the finest telescopes. Nearly everything told here, the salt and the sea, the lonely mountain and the bright cracked floor, the buried ocean and the breathing haze, has been learned only in the last short while, in the years of one small mission. For almost all of human history, this world kept its face entirely hidden, and only now, in our own brief moment, has it finally let itself be seen. You are among the very first generations who could ever know it at all. There is a way of seeing Ceres that makes it the most poignant of all the worlds. It may be a planet that never quite became one, an embryo arrested partway through its growing, a small round body that started down the long road toward becoming a true planet, and then simply stopped, its growth cut short before it could gather the mass to sweep its lane and take its place among the great. The giant Jupiter, forming nearby, is thought to have stirred the region so fiercely that the bodies there could never gather peacefully into a single larger world, and so they stayed small and scattered, and Ceres, the largest of them, stalled partway. It has waited ever since in that unfinished state, a survivor from the age when all the planets were still forming, a building block left over when the building was done and the workers had gone. To look at Ceres is to look at what the Earth itself once was, in its very first stages a small, wet, rounded world still slowly gathering itself, paused now forever at that early and tender beginning, a glimpse of our own origins held in the cold. There is, in all of this, a gentle reversal worth holding for a moment. We tend to think of the inner solar system as the place of rock and fire, and the outer reaches as the place of ice. And yet here is a world breaking that neat rule, an inner world made in large part of frozen water, a wet thing among dry neighbours. It carries the cold and the ice of the far reaches into the warm near country, as though a single snowbank had survived improbably into the height of a long summer. Ceres does not fit the simple map. It is an exception, a small surprise, an ice world keeping its place among the stones, and there is something heartening in a thing that quietly refuses the expected order and persists against the rule as exactly what it is. What that distant world might one day yet become is a thought worth resting in for a while, because it holds so very much water within it, and because it sits closer to us than any other dwarf planet does. Some of those who dream carefully about the far future imagine Ceres as a kind of quiet way station, a place where travellers crossing the solar system might one day draw water up from the ancient ice, for drinking, or for breaking apart into the makings of air to breathe and fuel to burn on longer journeys still farther out. Water can be split into the very gases that fill a lung and lift a ship, so a world rich in ice is, to a far future traveller, a world rich in everything. The very same buried sea that long ago left its bright salt in the craters could, in some distant age, become a wellspring for explorers far from home. The little world offering up its ancient water at last to hands and to throats that have not yet been born. A harvest, of a strange and gentle kind, gathered from a world named for the harvest, after waiting patiently through the whole long length of time. To imagine actually standing there upon it is to imagine a profound and gentle stillness, deeper than nearly any silence you have ever known. No wind, for there is almost no air to carry a breath of it. No sound at all, for there is nothing to bear a sound across the empty space. No whisper, no rustle, no distant murmur, only the perfect silence of the vacuum pressing in on every side. Only the grey plains stretching out flat to a surprisingly near horizon, the bright salt gleaming faintly in some far crater, the small fierce sun hanging in a black and star-crowded sky, and the turning of the world beneath your feet, carrying you all the way around just once in 9 soft hours. A silence so complete and so untroubled that it begins to feel less like emptiness, and more like a kind of peace, the deep settled hush of a place that has been resting undisturbed for billions of years, and is in no hurry whatsoever to wake, a stillness you could sink into and rest in without end. The little world has one last gift to offer, in the gentle way it lets you feel your own smallness without any fear in it. To hold the whole of Ceres steady in the mind, this single grey sphere with its hidden sea and its bright salt scars, drifting all alone through a vast and very nearly empty belt of space, is to feel the enormous scale of things settle softly down around you, rather than press heavily upon you. The little world is small against the belt, and the belt is small against the solar system, and the solar system is the merest grain against the wider dark, and you are smaller still than any of it. And yet none of that smallness is frightening here. You're small, and the bright world out there is small, and the belt around it is wide, and the dark beyond the belt is wider still, and somehow, in all of that immensity, there turns out to be room enough for everything that exists, including you, including this exact still moment, including the slow, pleasant heaviness now gathering, at last, behind your eyes. So let yourself rest within that great immensity, the way Ceres rests within its long orbit, held in place by the gentlest of forces, and asks for nothing at all in return. There is no need to follow the little world any farther tonight, no need to keep any hold on its names or its careful numbers, no need to do anything whatsoever but lie here exactly as you are while it turns, far away and faithful, in the patient dark. The gravity that holds it to its path is the same kind of gravity that holds you to your bed, the same gentle universal pull, drawing the world around its orbit and drawing your body down into rest. It has waited through ages beyond all counting, and it will go on waiting still, long after this night, long after every night, and you may simply allow it to, and allow yourself, at the very same slow time, to grow heavy and warm and entirely still. The long journey through these wonders is gently complete now, every one of them given and received, all of them resting wherever in you they quietly chose to land. And if you're still here, drifting now at the very soft edge of sleep, another quiet journey is already waiting for you there on the screen. ready whenever you might wish for it, or never at all, asking nothing of you, simply holding its place in the dark until you reach for it, or until you do not. You do not need to carry any of it onward with you. Let the names go now. Let the numbers go. Let the bright spots slowly fade and the small sun set and the grey world turn on without you watching over it. None of it ever asked to be held. It only asked to be near you for a little while, and it has been, and that alone is more than enough. Let your breath grow slow. Let your body grow heavy where it rests. Let the dark be soft and close around you. There is a world out there, round and quiet, turning in the cold. It needs nothing at all from you now. You are here. You're safe. You can let go. Rest now. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.